Stefan Palios is the CEO of Pulse Blueprint, a digital publication with a mission to put out helpful and inspirational content for entrepreneurs and creative workers. Please welcome to the stage, Stefan Palios.
Is my mic on now? Is it on? You can hear me. Wonderful. Hi, everybody. My name is Stefan Palios. As they said, I'm really excited to be here today. As they mentioned, I'm the founder of Pulse Blueprint Media. We put out content to help people solve workplace challenges and be more creative. But that's not what I'm here to talk about today. We're talking about building inclusive products. And I know that a lot of people understand inclusion differently. Sometimes it means building for a niche audience. Sometimes it means building for the maximum number of people possible. And I think we're going to talk about both of those elements today. And without further ado, I want to invite the expert on this topic that I'm going to be having a great fireside chat with, Samantha Stevens from Tinder. Let's give her a warm welcome. Oh, we get to sit now. This is lovely.
Wonderful.
All right, I also see a lot of you guys on your phones, which I'm very excited about because this is my good side. So take pictures, tweet, do anything you want. We're here for you. But to kick off, Samantha, hi.
Hello.
You are in the product team at Tinder. You've done quite a lot. I'd love to hear for both myself and for the audience a bit about yourself and then how you got into product management. It's not something that you can just take a degree in at school.
Absolutely. So I'm a director of product management at Tinder. I've been with the company for about 3 years now. And I think in general, there's 3 ways that people tend to get into product management. One is you're an engineer and you transition to the business side. One is you get an MBA or you find some sort of program or school that introduces you to product management. And one is you kind of end up doing a series of strange things that you really like doing. And then one day someone tells you, hey, you're doing product management. And you're like, oh, that's really great.
Which one was your path?
Yes. So my path, I started off in school studying psychology, Chinese, and justice and peace studies. So I always really liked the intersection of how people think, how the human mind works, how people, different cultures, different styles and patterns of thinking. And I also clearly had no idea what I wanted to do when coming out of school. So I started off in communications, and I took a job in public relations out of school. Started off working at a digital media firm, doing digital strategy for a big PR firm. And while, like many intro public relations employees, I was writing a lot of tweets and blog posts for random clients that wasn't super exciting. But back then, when the industry was kind of progressing, one of the strategies that we started doing was building websites for our clients to host their digital strategies. We were building blogs, we were building info sites, we were building platforms for crisis communications, and I started working with our team of UX specialists, with designers, with engineers, and really kind of fell in love with that creation aspect of it, with bringing these things to life and building things for people, to communicate to people. So I became kind of the de facto project manager to execute these creations.
Yeah.
And so I kind of looked around and I said, I really enjoy managing these projects, but wouldn't it be cool if I could actually do this myself? And so I decided to actually go back to school. I went back to school part-time. I did Boston University had a DC campus, and I went back to school at night, 12 hours a week for 2 years, in studying design and web development. So in that time, I also transitioned to a company very much like Connected here, doing product development for clients, and kind of fell into that intersection of the building things and the creating things, and also learning the tech and design side. And then ultimately someday someone was like, hey, you're actually doing product management. And now here I am.
So you just fell into it by accident.
Essentially, yes.
So you've been in a few different areas of your career. You used to work in financial services. What made you move from money to dating?
Great question. Who wouldn't want to move from money to dating, right? So I, again, studied psychology and have always been really, really fascinated by how people think and how people interact. And when thinking about all of the different types of products and companies that you could work for, there is really no better, purer form of human interaction than dating. And dating apps are essentially this core part of who we are as a species distilled down into an app.
Yeah. Ooh, that's terrifying. And also, when it comes to the product side then, there's a ton of research that you have to do. So you're on every dating app?
I am on every dating app, yes.
What's that experience like?
Well, my fiance thinks it's great.
Fair, I'm sure he's happy with it. So, as I mentioned in my intro, inclusion can be defined in a lot of different ways. When you think of product inclusion, both in a more general lens as well as through Tinder and through dating, what does it mean to you?
It's a great question. So when I think there's so many ways to think about inclusion, and as we've talked a little bit about, and as you mentioned, it's really about building things that work for the most amount of people. And so when I think about inclusion, I would love for everyone in the world to open an app, for Tinder in this situation, and feel, hey, this app was meant for me. I feel like I belong here. And for me personally, when I'm building a new product, there are three axes that I really focus on. I focus on gender, I focus on orientation, and I focus on ethnicity. And I feel that in the dating context, those three elements, dating is so different and unique in each of those three realms, that if I can really put myself in those users' shoes and ask people and talk to people and learn what does dating mean to you on each of those dimensions and solve for those users, I feel that I can build an inclusive product.
Yeah. So grounding that in an example, a lot of folks might think, okay, it's a dating app, you match with people, you chat. Like, how can that experience be so different depending on your gender, your orientation, your ethnicity, or any other different marker of who you are?
Yeah, that's a great question. Dating, for example, is very different in the United States as it is in other parts of the world.
Yeah.
Dating culture in the US, in our office in Los Angeles, is not the same as it is in Europe or Brazil or in Asia. So one of the things that I'm really interested in at Tinder is localizing the product and doing international research. I've done a lot of global user research studies, talking to users around the world, understanding what dating culture is for various different markets, because I truly believe that we can't have perfect product market fit until we understand what dating means for someone in outside of our beautiful little office in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
So one example is I did a user research trip to Brazil. It was one of our kind of emerging markets a couple of years ago. And this was early on in my days at Tinder. We had never really done product research outside of the United States. We had never done any international user research. And what we found when we were talking to people is currently in Tinder, the way that it works is when you sign up, you put in a radius of where you would like geographically to search for people, 1 mile, 5 miles, 10 miles, etc. What we learned in talking to users, we went to Rio de Janeiro, what we learned is that the way that city is set up, radius doesn't apply there. What's really important to people is the neighborhood.
Okay.
And in Los Angeles, again, which just happens to be where our product managers are located, that's their worldview, we don't think of things like that. We think of things in terms of radius.
Yeah.
So what we did was we took that information and we built in the ability to add in putting your neighborhood on your profile into the app so that we could be culturally relevant to people living in different countries.
Mm-hmm. So one of the other things that is very applicable with dating, but can even apply to a lot of other technology products, is user safety. And for an app like Tinder where you're actually meeting someone, there are a lot of safety concerns.
Yeah.
How can you think about that when you're building a product that you don't really have control over the experience once you decide to meet up?
That's a good question. I think the best that, especially in a sensitive app or a sensitive product where you are meeting strangers, that's inherently risky. I think that there are probably few other apps where we're saying, hey, go, maybe, I think Uber is another example where it's like, hey, go meet a stranger who you know nothing about. And trust and safety is something that we do think a lot about. And there are a couple of things that are really important. I think most of which is giving users all of the information up front that you possibly can. Because an informed consumer is the best type of user that you can have to make sure we are saying, hey, here are the risks, here are, we want you to know how to be safe on the app. We can't control the decisions that someone makes, but we can tell them how to make the right decision. So we recently launched a feature at Tinder called the Traveler Alert, which I think is actually really cool in a not so great way actually, but it's a feature for our LGBTQ users. In a lot of countries around the world, being gay is still criminalized, unfortunately. But Tinder is available in every country around the world, which is great. However, if someone is a man looking for a man or a woman looking for a woman, and they open the app in Tinder, they're in danger. They can be putting themselves in harm's way. So what we did is we put up a screen telling a user, hey, you have opened Tinder in a country where this is not okay. We automatically actually hide that person's profile because we don't want them to be shown. They can choose to be shown if they want to, but we want to make sure that we're protecting the users and informing them in the best way possible.
So it's about downloading rather as much information into the hands of the user as possible so they can make a decision instead of the product making a decision for them.
Right, it's about doing what we can on behalf of the users to keep them safe. I think to make the best decisions that we can for them, and then also giving them all the information that we can to say, here's the situation, do with that as you will, but this is the situation.
And what do you think is the best way, or a few different ways that a product creator can learn about those things? The things you didn't know you didn't know.
Open dialogue. There's so many things that you don't know. And every human is inherently biased by their own worldview. I personally think that proactive communication and soliciting feedback from users is so crucial to being an empathetic product manager, to being a good product manager. Because like you said, there's so many things that you don't know, and how could you possibly learn them unless you ask? So, and if you wait until a user comes to you with a complaint or with feedback, it's too late. You have already created a negative user experience for that person to the point where they have had to reach out and tell you, hey, this is a bad experience. You don't want to get to that point. So I think the best way that product managers can make sure that they are being inclusive is by always proactively reaching out and kind of taking stock of their product and thinking, again, on those, at least for me personally, on those three axes on ethnicity, orientation, and gender. Does my product fit for people? Can I ask users? Can I ask coworkers? Can I ask friends, people of these various identities? Does my product feel like it was built for you? Going back to what I said at the beginning, I want everyone to be able to open the app and feel like they belong, like the product was meant for them.
And sometimes you're not going to be able to do that, and sometimes the product will fail in its intended use or won't provide an optimal experience, and you will have that negative feedback from a user. As a product creator, what can you do to respond to that when you may not be able to directly solve that problem?
I think like any product manager or any product creator, you get the feedback from the users, and then you can you look at it against your backlog of things that you need to do, and prioritize. You say, how big of an issue is this? What's the, what is the type of user that this impacts? What would be the business impact of this? And figure out, can I integrate? I have this piece of feedback, right? Here's all of my roadmap of things that I want to do this quarter, this year, this month, whatever. Can I integrate this feedback? Can I solution it into something else that I'm building? So sometimes it's a matter, I think, of building a specific solution against that feedback. Sometimes, and I think a better opportunity is ways that you can integrate a solution into a larger product initiative. That's probably a better sell to your executives, to put on your roadmap, to your engineers, et cetera.
And Tinder is a global product, and many of the folks in this room are either working on global products right now or want to build global products. But when you think about the notion of inclusion and building something that can be used by the maximum amount of people, is it a function of build one product and then add features as necessary, or do you need to be building multiple products that's presented under one brand? How can you think about that when there are so many differences in different localities, even sometimes within the same country, never mind internationally?
I think it depends. I think it depends on your scale. I think it depends on your product. I truly believe in localization. Mm-hmm. I truly believe that once you get, there is no, in most products, there is not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution. Mm-hmm. If you're a startup, you build, you kind of solve for the 80%, right? Like you take the lean approach, you build what solves the most problems with most people, but once you reach a certain scale, you have to start localizing. You have to say, okay, here's a market or here's a type of user that I'm really interested in. I know that my current solution doesn't necessarily apply to them. I'm not solving their user problems with the solution I have right now. So for example, in Asia, in our Japan market, the concept of dating really isn't a thing. So the fact that we brand ourselves as a dating app doesn't really resonate with a lot of those users. However, in the US or in Canada, dating is a thing. So it doesn't necessarily make sense for us to continue to push this messaging in cultures where dating isn't categorically accepted. We want to make sure that we're an app that allows people to connect in the way that's most relevant to them. So, for example, we're working on a feature that allows people to add their interests to their bio. So you can say, I'm looking for an activity partner to do karaoke or to go hiking or something, which is how people tend to meet in Japan, kind of under this context of finding people with mutual interest. That's something that it might work in the US, it might not, but it's an example of how we can localize the product based off of research and understanding of the different culture.
Okay, and in a lot of companies, this type of research can be quite segmented. You'll get some feedback from the sales team, the customer success team, the product team will do their own research. How would you recommend that somebody who might be stuck in that kind of environment better collaborate in order for this information flow to go from the person who discovered it to the person who needs to edit the product to the person who then needs to bring the product to market, when that can't all be one person in a small startup?
Yeah, I'm a huge advocate of scrappy DIY user research. In every company or startup I've tried to create, or even at Tinder where I've had access to resources, I love doing my own user research. I think there is nothing more important than actually talking to your own users and hearing their voices. So I will call users on the phone. I will match with people and say, hey, I'm doing research for Tinder. Do you want to meet for coffee? And I think that when you as a product manager actually have that information and that insight and that true empathy with the people who you're trying to build solutions for, then you can be the internal advocate, right? Once you have that core information, you can then go to your engineers or your sales team or your marketing team and say, hey, let me share this information with you. Let me get you on the phone with this person. I think you're really going to be interested in what they have to say. Mm-hmm. But I think as a PM, you really need to be that voice of your user. That is your sole job.
And you brought up an interesting point that you'll actually use Tinder to match with people disclosing that you work for Tinder, you want to chat with them. How important would you say it is in the user research process to find a way for your product to be a part of it? You know, yours is a very natural fit. You're trying to meet with people. Tinder offers that. Not every product is that natural.
Sure.
Should you try to force it into the process for the sake of the dog fooding methodology, or does it need to be part of the process to get high quality user feedback?
No, definitely not. I have gone to shopping malls in Brazil with someone who speaks Portuguese and said, hey, can I buy you a cup of coffee? I've gone up to people in Germany at beer gardens. Often either a beverage containing alcohol or caffeine tends to work to incentivize people to talk to you. It's helpful when you work for a consumer product. I think it's probably more difficult if you work for an enterprise product. But I've always found that people are open to talking about themselves. I've honestly just emailed users and said, hey, my name is Samantha, I'm doing research for Tinder, I'd really, really value your opinion. It helps me do my job better, it helps your experience be better on this app. Can I have 30 minutes of your time? And I've had overwhelmingly positive responses. I don't think it needs to be built into your app.
Yeah, and that thing you mentioned about being a consumer brand, obviously that helps. You say I'm from Tinder and someone goes, okay, I've heard of that.
Yeah.
But a question on the inclusion side, when we talk about inclusion, meaning build products for the maximum amount of people to use it,
sure.
Is that 100% necessary in a niche B2B platform that isn't intended to be used by a maximum, but perhaps a certain type of person? Like, how can that product manager or product developer think about inclusion when they're not necessarily trying to build for everybody?
I think that's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that. Yeah. I've only really worked with consumer products, but I think it's just a matter of, I actually think that can best be solved by workplace diversity.
Okay.
I think that, as I mentioned before, everyone has their own worldview as an employee, as a human, as a coworker, right? So for example, myself and my identity as a female, as an American, as a New Yorker, that's a certain point of view that I bring to the table when I'm building products, when I'm talking to designers, engineers, when I'm coming up with an idea, building a roadmap, etc. Mm-hmm. If it was just me in a room, that's the only point of view that I would have. However, if you now combine me with someone else with a different point of view, a different background, different identities, we would now have those 2 points of view in combination. So if you add in diverse group of people, you have people with different, intersections of different identities. I think that's how you build a good product team, a good company that can solve for, can be inclusive of multiple users, multiple points of view, even if you're not trying to necessarily build a big consumer product that's, meant to be, understand how gay dating works, for example.
And you've also moved teams at Tinder a couple times. So product can mean many different things. Can you just quickly explain what you're up to now?
Yeah, so I just moved, so I'm on the growth team. I was previously doing international growth, which is where I did a lot of this really cool international research. I just moved a couple months ago to the revenue growth team. So thinking about how we build our subscription tier of Tinder, and also how we make that more inclusive. Something that's really interesting to me, and if there are any single people in the room who would like to share ideas, I'd love to hear them after the talk. But a lot of dating features that are part of a subscription tier are often built for male users. They're often built with male pain points in mind, but there's not a lot of people who are really thinking, what does a female kind of premium experience look like? And so one of the first things that I did when I joined the revenue team was say, guys, where's the female premium experience? Why do all of our current subscription features solve problems for the guys?
Nice. You know, men building products for men, I suppose, needs to stop, or at least needs to be augmented. So to wrap up, I'm curious, in all of your experience in product so far, what's been the most underrated piece of advice? The advice where you heard it and you're like, okay, thanks, but later on you realized just how important it was.
I think the most underrated piece of advice that will at first sound really general, but there's a twist, is that a very high up female executive at Tinder once told me, it's better to ask forgiveness than to ask for permission, but don't mess up too many times. And that end part, I think, is really interesting, because the first part of that advice, I think, is great, and I've always kind of lived my life in that sense, but it almost gives a little bit of permission to be reckless. And so that last part is a bit of a check, right? It's a bit of a check saying, you know what, you have a few shots with your name on the line and with whether it's your company's runway or your founder's money, your investors or your users, so don't mess it up too many times.
Yeah, awesome. Well, those are all the questions that we've got time for today. If you have any further questions, by the way, Twitter, for me, I am at Stefan Palios, and if you want to download Tinder, you might get to match with Samantha to give your feedback. But join me in thanking Samantha for her time. Thank you so much.